I mentioned yesterday in my opening remarks that there are many changes going on to the internet today. IPv6 introduction is only one of them. There are many others. And so this is in the midst of the V6 introduction. You have to worry about these other things as well. But don't let the IPv6 problem hide itself in the midst of all these other changes. It is so fundamental to the ability of the net to continue to grow that it really has to be addressed with high priority. There are lots of things that are part of the internet environment, and there will be more of them. I think that this is another reason why IP version 6 has turned out to be so important. It's because there will be this proliferation of devices, appliances. I used to joke that every light bulb would have its own IPv6 address. Probably the light bulbs won't, but the light sockets won't, because they will want to be visible and controllable. You might want to be able to tell whether a light is off or on, just like you want to know whether the burner on a stove is off or on. I don't know if you're like me, when you go on a holiday, when you're about 1.5 miles away from the house, you start thinking, did I leave this thing on? Did I turn it off? Can I fix it? And in fact, I remember at one point I was in Germany at a cocktail party in the evening, and I got an email from my wife saying that one of the circuits in the house was not working. It was the important one. It had the television set on it. and so I was trying to talk her through the circuit breaker panel. Now, this is an artist, okay, so this is not the first place that she would comfortably go to throw a circuit breaker. And I remember thinking, you know, if the circuit breaker panel state could be visible through the internet and I could throw the circuit breaker, it would make life a lot easier. On the other hand, you know, my 15-year-old next door would have a wonderful time flipping the circuit breakers. So once again, I would be smart to do very strong authentication before I would allow some of these things to happen. So as you introduce IPv6 and a large number of appliances and devices on the internet, you should also be thinking very hard about strong authentication to make sure that access control is a part of the design. I've already shown this slide before, so not only in this meeting, but in other meetings, and you've probably all seen it. I just want to emphasize that you can't predict what people will decide to put on the internet. We used to tell jokes about putting a toaster on the network. We called it Toaster Net. And we would, elbow each other in the ribs saying, that's pretty stupid, isn't it? Until someone at an Interop exhibition actually put a toaster up on the internet. You could remotely determine how burned you wanted your toast. And we all thought that was pretty amusing, but here we are in 2011. There isn't any question that a very large number of devices will be part of the internet environment. I've already talked about my sensor net at home. The thing I want to emphasize is that it's a working IPv6, like 6-LoWPAN radio-based network. And it's quite reliable. It's a commercial product, so this is not something that I soldered together in the garage. And the fact that it is a mesh network makes it even more interesting. Every sensor is also a store and forward node. And as an experiment, after it was installed, each one of the devices uses a AA battery. So it's a 3-volt system with 2 AA batteries. And I decided to let it run until it stopped working to see how low the voltage could go before the nodes failed. And to my surprise, it went all the way down to 2.24 volts before it failed, which took about 10 months or so. Even the guys at ArchRock, I think, didn't actually do that experiment, so I feel like I contributed a small amount of information to them about the reliability of the net. The Smart Grid is a program in the United States to put all kinds of electrical devices on the net and to allow them to get information about the cost of electricity so that you could program the device to decide not to run like a water heater or washing machine at times when electrical prices are high. This is just the beginning of a larger number of systems that will be networked and will be tracking resource usage. So, for example, we might also be tracking not only our use of electricity, but oil, gas, and water, and other kinds of resources. And part of the idea here is to provide feedback to people about the lifestyle decisions that they make, because often we can't connect our decisions with what the costs are from an economic point of view. So this kind of feedback is only possible if systems are networked and can be measured and can report their results, which can be analyzed and presented to you in some useful way. Of course, some of you will remember C-3PO from Star Wars. We'll also have the need for a lot of intercommunication among these various devices. And here's C-3PO saying, yes, I speak refrigerator, range top, HVAC, and alarm system quite well, among probably 3 million other languages that C-3PO was designed to deal with. But we will have those problems with devices that are networked that collect information about different kinds of resource usage. We're going to have to be able to capture that information and understand what it means in order to analyze it successfully. So here are some of the things that I believe people will have to do, maybe you will have to do, in order to achieve implementation of IPv6. One is, of course, every place in the software that thinks an internet address is only 32 bits will have to change to know that it could be 128. Second, you'll have to be able to operate in dual stack mode, especially for servers. Now, this is, on the surface, not necessarily terribly hard, but there's also network management that has to work in both modes. This is actually harder than if you were only running an IPv4 or only running an IPv6. If something goes wrong in the net, like a fiber cut or power failure or some other kind of configuration problem, you may get error messages for both the v4 and the v6 components of the network, and you have to be prepared to understand that this collection of errors may be related. So making sure that you have a system that can deal with both v6 and v4 errors and status reports and alarms is also a challenge. I think one of the most visible problems which will arise is going to be problems with configurations at the edges of the net. In the residential environment, people have network address translation devices, they have routers, they have firewalls. And these devices often don't know what IPv6 is at all. They may have been purchased some time ago before v6 was on the horizon as an issue, and they might actually break if a v6 packet shows up, or maybe just throw it away because it doesn't know what to make of it and thinks it's a corrupted transmission. So figuring that out is not something that most users are going to be capable of doing. So if you happen to be a network service provider, or you happen to be like Google, an end provider of applications, helping a user figure out whether they are capable of doing successful IPv6 interaction is a non-trivial exercise. And so Google, along with many others, is going to be spending a good portion of 2011 working with ISPs to do pairwise testing between that ISP and Google and the ISP's customers in order to at least surface what some of the problems are. If we're lucky, we'll be able to categorize the various configuration problems, the various types of failures, maybe even find a way to help the equipment providers identify what users could do to remedy the problem. It might involve the download of new software, it might involve the acquisition of a new piece of hardware, but whatever it is, I think we need to help those users because they aren't themselves experts in any of this sort of detailed configuration. Another element of all this is that we're doing routing both in v4 and v6 at the same time, which means that we have to run both protocols, both routing for both of the protocols or both of the packet formats. And the routing may not be parallel. It may very well be that the v6 connectivity and the v4 connectivity are not the same, they're topologically different. And the result is that route failures of various kinds in v4 will not necessarily reflect in v6. So you may have connectivity in one protocol and not in the other. And finally, I mentioned user training and bug fixing already. And I think that ultimately, we're going to have to make sure that our service systems, in the case of Google, will work with a party who only has v4 or who only has v6. Today, we know they work with v4. somebody who's only running V6, there are questions like, can they get to a resolver that will resolve a V6 query, or a query that comes in on using the V6 protocol only? What about the domain name system? Will it respond to both V4 and V6 queries? There are all kinds of potential hazards when you look at proxies. So there are many different devices that could be part of the chain between the user and the other end of the system, or between peers. And in order to make sure that we've done all of our homework, we have to answer the question, does it work when parts of the system are only capable of running IPv6? So this is not a complete list by any means, but when this panel is assembled, which it should be shortly after I shut up, one of the things I hope you'll get into, both among panel members and maybe between those of us who are participating in the audience, is to listen for and ask questions about the problems that people have already encountered, so we can learn from that to plan our own transitions into IPv6 use. There are lots of other problems here that I don't want to spend too much time on, not because they aren't important, but because I want to get to the panel. I think that we will probably need ways of validating equipment that claims to be able to do IPv6. So there are interoperability testing places like the University of New Hampshire in the United States, and presumably here as well. We will need to help users understand what's going on, so that if strange things happen, they will at least be forewarned that some connectivity problems could arise. I think it would be very handy if we could develop software that will help analyze for the user what steps they can take to recover if they aren't getting good connectivity in IPv6 or getting any. There are just so many different things that could possibly break, and we have to think through every single one of the cases in order to make this work. So in the end game, I think that the NAT boxes that are around, even if you consider carrier-grade NAT boxes, just postpone the inevitable necessity for everyone to run IPv6. Another thing which is really kind of interesting is that because IPv6 allows the same device to have multiple IP addresses, we may have some interesting multi-homing effects that are a consequence of that. In the long run, it would be very nice if it were possible to simply connect devices together and have them generate V6 addresses if they need to in order to communicate. This, by the way, leads to a possibility of not having any routers in between. So the possibility of using IPv6 for two devices that simply have adjacent connectivity would be a very interesting outcome if we can figure out how to do that. That would have benefits for emergency services where people show up. There isn't any network except for the devices that are able to directly talk to each other. The mesh network that's part of the sensor net in my house has that characteristic because the devices serve as routers for each other. And finally, I think that there will be certainly years, if not decades, of dual mode operation. It would be quite interesting to imagine when the last IPv4 address disappears from the internet, and it's conceivable that it simply won't until something replaces the internet itself. I don't know what that is either, but I can imagine that it will happen someday. Something better will be invented. Maybe we'll use quantum communication or something like that, or some other interesting means of linking systems together. But for a long time, we're all going to be living with V4 and V6. Let's make sure that we can live with V6, please. Thank you very much.